Hi Year 4, this is our history lesson for Monday the 18th of January. If you either missed the live lesson or you want to come back on and have a look at the sources of history that we discussed in the lesson. To begin with, let's remind ourselves what knowledge we've learnt so far. Can we recall that important knowledge from last week? So there's some missing words and numbers here. The African Kingdom of began in AD, which corresponds to the settlement in Britain. So find the missing words in there, please. Pause the video while you think what they should be. Okay, the African Kingdom of Benin began in 900 AD, which corresponds to the Anglo-Saxon settlement in Britain. Remember, we can also use the words CE to mean Common Era, which means the same as, refers to the same time period as AD, Anno Domini. So AD or CE mean the same thing. Now, we can use sources of history to understand the past, but it's important to know the point of view of the person who created the source. Now, what if I said that this book was read? Would I be right? So that little picture there, if I said this book was read, would I be right? Now, most people would say, no, it's blue. But what if I turned that book around and on the other side it was red? And that from my point of view, the book I was looking at was red on one side. We'd both be right. So you've got to be careful about judging other opinions to be true or false until you understand the point of view of the person who is talking about them or looking at them. Now that's a really important thing to remember in history. Whenever we look at sources of history, they really only tell us one person's point of view about what happened on that particular day in that particular time. And if we put all of those points of view together, we can begin to get an idea of what really happened in history. But we can never be absolutely sure. Every single person who was there at a particular time in history will have a different point of view about what their life was like. So that's really important to remember when we're talking about sources of history. So we're going to look at two different sources that come from two different points of view on the Kingdom of Benin, and we're going to discuss what we can learn from them. So the first one, this is a drawing made by a Portuguese trader, so someone from Portugal in Europe who was trading with the citizens of ancient Benin. And they created this drawing, perhaps in their diary or perhaps in their notebook, when they'd been over there in the city trading. So I'm going to read these facts down the right-hand side. When the Portuguese first discovered the city in 1485, they were stunned to find this vast kingdom made of hundreds of interlocked cities and villages in the middle of the African jungle. They called it the Great City of Benin. At a time when there were hardly any other places in Africa the Europeans acknowledged as a city. Indeed, they classified Benin City as one of the most beautiful and best planned cities in the world. Now, in a moment, we're going to discuss what we can see in the picture and what was the trader's point of view. But let's have a look at some of the language in that passage I've just read out. Now, it says when the Portuguese first discovered the city, and it says that discovered in quote marks because they didn't discover it, it was there all along. They didn't find it or invent it. That was just the first time that they came across it. But from their point of view, they discovered this amazing city in the middle of Africa. And the European people at that time didn't realise how developed cities in Africa were. And they thought that this was amazing. They were expecting just to see jungle and people living in huts or people living within the forest. So they were amazed to see this developed city. And when they saw it, they decided it was the most beautiful and best planned city they'd ever seen. Now, they can't have seen other cities in Africa, and they wouldn't have seen all of the cities in the world. So again, this is a point of view, a person's opinion. Now, let's have a look at what their point of view, how their point of view is represented in that picture. We can see in the foreground at the front what looks like a group of Benin citizens playing drums and instruments and leading a procession. And in the middle of that procession, that possibly could be the Portuguese trader himself or one of his friends sat on a horse being led along in the procession. And following that, it looks like a group of people with perhaps armour and helmets on. Now, they could be the Portuguese people as well, or they could be the people from Benin. It's quite hard to see. And then in the middle ground, we've got a fence and a gateway that these people are coming through. And beyond that, we can see the beginnings of the city. There are buildings with sloped roofs that look a bit to our European eyes as if they are churches. And perhaps they looked a bit like that to the European traders as well. But we're not sure if that's what they are. And then beyond that, in the distance, the city of Benin stretches out, and we can just about see the neat rows and lines of streets, looking like a modern city, looking like Nottingham or London or any of the cities that we have developed now. In the far distance, we can see the hills, and we can see a few tall buildings amongst there. All sorts of things. The more you look, the more you see. Now remember, this is one person's point of view, and when we look at it with our modern point of view, and we think, oh, that looks like a modern church. But we can't be sure what those buildings were used for just by looking at this picture. We can't be sure what the people in the picture are doing. We can just use our modern point of view to try and give our best guess. Now here's a different source of history. The figure at the centre of this brass plaque is the Oba, the King of Benin. In the background, on either side of the Oba, are two tiny figures, identified as Portuguese traders. They are characterised by their long hair and European-style hats. Two attendants kneel beside the Oba to show he has the royal power in Benin. The king was regarded as the highest political and religious authority and respected as the representative of the ancestors. So that last sentence means that he was looked up as the most important political person, like our Prime Minister, and at the same time the most important religious person, like our Pope. He meant the same as both of those people put together. And he also represented all of the people who had been before him in history in Benin, all of the kings and queens who had been his ancestors. He represented all of those things to the people. Now it's really interesting that he is right there in the middle, and beside him, almost the same height as him, are his attendants. They're kneeling to show that they respect him, but they're sort of the same size as him, and they stand either side of him. But the tiny figures are the European traders, the Portuguese people. Now, the fact that they are shown so small in the plaque suggests they are less important. They're kind of off in the distance, they're there. But the person who created this plaque, they didn't want them to be the main image, the main part of his craft, his artwork to go on the palace walls. They were just there in the background, a part of city life, but not an important part. So I think that's really interesting. We've had two different sources, just two out of the millions of sources we could have chosen, one from a European point of view, and this one from a Benin craftsman point of view. And they show both the Portuguese and the Benin people in both. But the point of views are so different, and they show such different things, that when we put them together, we can start to get an idea of what life was like at that time. So I'm going to summarise that, and this will be quite useful for you and your history task when you're working independently. These two sources show very different points of view, which help us to build up an idea of what life was like, and they help us to prove that by the 1400s, Benin was a powerful, wealthy and developed civilization. Source 1, the Portuguese drawing, shows us that Benin city had walls, gates, buildings with towers. They had streets set out in grids of roads. They had a strong community that was keen to trade with Europeans. They were peaceful and happy, and the Europeans thought that Benin was one of the most beautiful and planned cities in the world. Source 2, the Benin plaque, shows us that the Oba was a powerful and extremely important man. He was respected by both his people and the European traders. To his people, he was the most important person. He had guards or attendants who protected him or worked for him. He was happy to trade with Europeans, but did not see them as very important. The skill to create this plaque shows that the Benin craftsmen were very good at their work and had highly developed tools and techniques. Now, when you looked at those sources, you might have spotted loads of details that I didn't, and you might be able to use those details to help you understand the different points of view. So hopefully you've got even more than that from them. So your task today is to create something, either a video or a poster or a presentation, to share your new knowledge about ancient Benin. Using the two sources we just looked at, you are going to prove this statement. By the 1400s, Benin was a powerful, wealthy, and developed civilization. So that's the key bit of knowledge you need to take from this lesson. By the 1400s, Benin was a powerful, wealthy, and developed civilization. But you've got to use the clues in those two bits of evidence, those two sources, to kind of prove that statement. So you might put that statement on the middle of your poster and surround it by the facts that we discussed by looking at those sources. Or in your video presentation, you might read out some of those facts from those two different sources. You could perhaps act out the part of the Portuguese trader saying what he thinks of the city, and then act out the part of perhaps one of the attendants to the king to say what they think of their lives, using those two different points of view. I can't wait to see what you send in to us. Have fun!